Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Old Scribes podcast. And today we have a very special guest, legendary Star Ledger columnist Jerry Izenberg, uh, a member of 18 Halls of Fame, his 74th year in his newspaper career, author of 15 books, including his latest, Larry Doby in Black and White, the story of a baseball pioneer. Jerry, thank you for coming on and talking to us for a little bit.
A pleasure. I'm glad we can talk.
Yeah, right. It took a minute, but hey, we're here, right?
All right.
Um, so first thing I want to talk about is it's been October 30th was the 50-year anniversary of the Rumble in the Jungle, Ali and Foreman, which you covered. And so, I mean, when people say that it's been 50 years ago, what do you think? What goes through your mind when you hear the 50 years since the Rumble in the Jungle?
Well, first of all, it's a moment I will never forget, not because of a great fight, because it was not a great fight. That comes with myth and with people, if they use the same urinal as Ali did in a public men's room, they write a book about it. So there's all kinds of versions. I'll tell you what made it last. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, Zaire time, because that's when the satellite came over. Everything was primitive then.
Yes.
So they had to kill 2 hours from the time they opened the gate. So they had native dancers, and the drums kept drumming. And I wrote a chapter in my boxing book, which was called Under an African Moon. That's why I don't think I will ever cover another fight of those conditions. And if anybody invites me to one, I certainly will decline. Uh, we lived on a military reservation there. Um, I passed up on all the monkey meat. I mean, it was a staple, but I just couldn't do that. Um, not unless it had an organ grinder. So the next thing was um, water buffalo was too tough. Powdered eggs in the military mess hall was okay. And then I knocked on Ali. It was a role reversal, a Civil War role reversal. I would knock on Ali's little condo there. We were all in condos. I knock on his door and I say, "Hey, boss, you got any table scraps left over?" That's a role reversal, because they were getting their meat from the commissary, from the U.S. commissary, for the diplomats. So the day before the morning of the fight, I said Jerry Lisker. I said to Jerry Lisker was the sports editor of the New York Post, but not yet. He was then the sports editor of the London Sun, and because of a narrower time gap, he could dictate on the phone. I could not.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, "Where you going?" I said, "I'm going to go down to the arena. I want to see if there's such a thing as a table and a chair, because I have my doubts." The day before, we couldn't file any footage because all the telegrams, not telegrams, the teletypes were down. We must send to Kinshasa for a specialist to fix this, and they did. And the way he fixed it was to plug all the machines in. That was the height of technology. So Jerry said, "Well,
74.
I'll go down with you. I want to check on my phone." I said, "Don't bother. It ain't gonna work." He said, "No, no, no, no. You'll see." So we get there, and he dials a number at random, and somebody answers in Lingala, which is a kind of African Yiddish all along the road. Of course, Trans Africa, it's a merchant language. So he said, "You see it worked?" I said, "Jerry, I will put up $100. It's yours if it works. If it works, if it gets out of this arena. And conversely, you'll put up five, and we'll go to McDonald's, because as far as I'm concerned, you got no shot." So now the fight is going to start. Foreman comes in the ring, and I hear him say, "Can you hear me? Listen, George Foreman is coming in. He's wearing African dub. Can you hear me?" "Yes, we can hear you." Okay. Ali's in his face. He's saying something. Later on, I learned was Pop, pop, pop. That's going to be the sound of me hitting your face. You're online. So now, on top of that, the fight is proceeding. Well, Ali, there was no such thing as a rope a dope. It was never planned. It was never thought about. He got hit. He said, "Hey, it's pretty hard." So he went to the. So I get on the ropes, put up my hands, and let me figure this out. Well, Foreman, as I explained, I speak to Foreman about every 3 or 4 weeks. I said, you really couldn't fight. You really couldn't fight when you were the champion. You fought Ali. And he said, I'm not going to get mad at you because you're right. He was taught by a Job Corps physical instructor how to, and that's going to take you to the world title. It doesn't mean so much. Anyway, he said, I learned when I made my comeback, I looked at tape of everybody, and he was right. So he's on the ropes. He comes back, and then he says, get off the ropes, get off the ropes. And everybody, they're all clones, because they're all afraid of Ali. Yeah, get off the ropes, get off the ropes. And Ali says, shut up. That's when he figured out what he was going to do. Foreman, like all of us, had 2 arms. Unlike all of us, each arm weighed 430 pounds. And he's going to go through gloves that he can't penetrate. If he'd have hit him in the arms, he'd have broken his arms. But because he could hit.
Yes.
So it went on. And Ali would do things like, you punch like a girl. Is that the best you got? You got to be kidding. He never hit Ali in the face. Now comes to the time Ali says, time to go to work. He throws first punch he's really thrown since the opening round. And just one punch. But it tested what he wanted to know. Foreman froze and took like a half step back. In the next round, he hit him with 2 right hand leads, and the fight was over. George fell in sections. His ankles went first, his knees, and he fell. I'm surprised he didn't fall through the floor the way that thing was constructed. Now, on top of that, I've been listening to, sitting next to me, Jerry Lisker. He's on the rope still. Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you. I don't know what his purpose is. Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you. Now, Foreman is down, and he looks up. Can you hear me? And across the ring, the Belgian technician says, yes, I can hear you perfectly. Jerry had a boxing scholarship to San Jose State. That fight was far better than Ali and Foreman. If you might have, if the fight was in New York, you might have walked out. But there, you couldn't walk anyways. All right, now the fight is over. I'm going to tell you about one of the 2 best memories I have of Ali. This came that night. So David, we had a huge rainstorm. If they'd fought half an hour later, there'd have been no fight.
Yep.
So I was not happy with the time deadlines and everything. I said to Dave Anderson, we're sitting on a bus going back to this military place. And I said, I got to find him. You want to come? He says, I'd like to. I said, well, it was so forced. It happened so quickly. I want to get another shot at him. I'll write it as a follow. He says, that's great for one thing. You didn't think of this, Jerry. There's 15,000 acres here. Where are we going to look for him? I said, I know exactly where I'm going to look for him because he had told me. And it was then called it's back to being the Congo River again. It was the Zaire River because he had told me he thought it was a very spiritual space. We were standing looking at the river. So we're standing on a little hill, and he's about 20 yards ahead of us, maybe 30, facing the water, which is where I expected him to be doing. I don't know I don't know what he was doing, but he's shouting because I can see his head going up and down and moving shoulders, but he doesn't know we're there. Consequently, he is not performing for anybody. He's doing something he wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly, he stops. Up in the air go his arms in the Rocky pose, staring at French Congo, and then he yelled something. We don't know what it was. And then he turned around, saw us, came over, and said, fellas, don't ask me what tonight means to me because I couldn't tell you and you wouldn't understand. And then I think to myself, him there looking across the water, which he feels is mystical, arms up, reaching up toward heaven. I said, the son of a bitch did it. He in this moment, in my mind, he is definitely the king of the world. That's one memory.
That,
Uh, Another, if you want to know the most lasting memory of all, when he fought Holmes, which I knew was crazy.
yeah.
I'm in his room the night before because we were really close for 50 years.
Yeah.
And he says, "You don't think I can win?" I said, "Champ, listen to me. I didn't come over here to make predictions. I didn't come over to hear your whining. I came over here for one reason. I wanted to thank you for all the white spaces you filled in my paper when I had nothing to write." Jumps up,
Yeah.
grabs his shirt, rips it open. The buttons are on the front. He said, "Look at this. What do you think?" He looked like the night he beat us in the first time. I didn't change my mind. What I didn't know was he was on diuretics.
Yep.
That's why he threw him 20 punches. He could hardly lift his hands. Well, after it's a mess, it finishes, and I'm gambling. We're Caesars, and I'm losing, which is consistent for me. And I'm gambling some more, and I'm losing again. Ah, shit! I go into the I go into the men's room, and there's an elderly black guy there. Today he wouldn't be elderly to me. I'm 94, but but he was elderly. He had so many wrinkles on his face. It looked like an aerial map of the Burma Road. So now I say to him, "Do you mind if I?" He hands me a towel. Do you mind if I ask you? No, go ahead. What do you want to know? Well, did you bet on this fight? He said, "Yeah, I did." I said, "Well, who did you bet on?" This is the other memory. He looked at me. It could have been his eulogy. He said, "I bet on the man who gave me dignity." That's the only night in the history of Las Vegas where a few wagers have been made. The only night that the cocktail waitresses, the bartenders, the Valley Parkers, everybody can, with no more than a $50 bet, changed the odds in Las Vegas. It wasn't big players; their bets were already in.
Yeah.
Some of the casinos had it even, and one actually had it Ali 6-5.
Wow.
And I thought about that. I mean, this was really the fact that he didn't die. Really, I mean, he was. I really was afraid for his health. I will tell you one more thing about Ali, which I always like to tell people.
Yeah.
Two people picked Ali to win by knockout. We may have been the only two people who ever picked him. This is why I picked him. And when Lisker heard my reasoning, that's why Lisker picked him. We go up to push his buttons 10 days before he's going to leave. And because there's always a circus. We're
Sure.
standing we're Deer Lake. We're standing in the doorway of the gym. He can't see us. I was wrong. He's got to have eyes in the back of his head. Of course, he was just hitting the heavy bag, and then all of a sudden he's yelling at the heavy bag, "I'm going to knock that sucker out. I'll knock that sucker out." Well, I knew something that Jerry Lisker and hardly anybody else knew. He had arthritis in his hands. He hadn't knocked out anybody in a long time, unless it was some guy who was a museum guard or somebody off the street. And I said, "My God, he's hitting the heavy bag." We have lunch. Gene Kilroy, who is the boss in the camp,
Hmm.
tells me a story. He said, "I took him to Philadelphia to a hospital. The doctor said, 'Your doctor, that's the fight doctor, has been giving you injections. If he wants to give you another one and you have any punches left, throw them at him. You're not taking any more needles. I'm going to tell you, I can't cure it. I can make you fight without pain and use your hands equally effectively, but I can't cure it. You're going to soak your hands in paraffin 3 times a day, hot paraffin.
Mm.
The reason I know this day I don't feel like an idiot by telling that story, you see these hands? They're arthritic. I found out from Ali, and when they turned bad, I soaked my hands in hot paraffin. So it's the only thing I ever learned from him, but I learned it. Anyway, so Liska says, I'm going to tell you what I think Liska says to me. His time is past. The exile killed him. We know that. And I just don't see him winning at all. I said, well, you pick what you want to pick. I'm picking him by knockout. Why? And I tell him a story about the shots and everything. I tell him a story about the heavyweight, which he could not hit before. And then I say to him, a long time ago, this man said to me, if I tell you a mosquito can pull a plow, can pull a plow, don't argue with me, hitch him up. And I said, I'm hitching a knockout to my pick. Jerry said, well, maybe. We were the only two heroes.
That's amazing because at the time, I mean, it was almost the same feeling that came along. What 6 years later when he fought Holmes, he just was not given any chance.
No, and he didn't have any chance. But I'll tell you, people don't realize this about Ali. It was never the money because
Right.
he lost the first fortune, but he had three fortunes. He lost two of them, but he did all right by the time he quit. But he fought because the people were his opium.
Yep.
People like that man who said, "I fought for the man who gave me dignity." This is why, and he just he lived off people. And so the week of the fight, when he knew he could not win that fight, first he tried to con me into thinking he was going to win it when he took his shirt off, and then besides that, he was magnificent at the final press conference. Um, Holmes said to him, "Your ass is grass, and I'm the lawnmower." And Allen, which for Holmes was a great line. And anyway, Ali looks at him and he says, "I can't be bothered with this triviality." He said, while I'm listening to him and looking at you in my own mind, my other mind, I'm making up the world's shortest poem. And now I will recite it for you. Me, we. He had a wonderful time until he had a fight.
Well, that was 1970. Well, Ali Foreman 1974, Ali Holmes 1980. At the time in 1980, George Foreman was retired. Then he mounted his comeback 7 years later, and 30 years ago, he won the heavyweight title for the second time when he knocked out.
And then he could fight because no matter how big, he had to lose 50 pounds. So he
Yes.
had to fight a lot of stiffs in the beginning.
Yes.
No matter how eh, how easy a fight it would have been. He studied tapes on the guy. He became a self-taught analyzer of fights.
Is that the difference between the first George Foreman and the second George Foreman?
Absolutely, night and day.
And you were at the Maurer fight, correct?
Yes.
So
His
what were your thoughts going into that fight? What kind of chance did you give George?
a tremendous chance, and I'll tell you why. I was in Moore's camp for an interview in California, and Teddy Atlas was screaming at him. They were looking at the tape. Pay attention, damn it! Pay attention. You can't fight this guy. You only have one time. You'll kill him. You're so much ahead of him. You only have one time to hang a jab. If you do that, he will knock your head out into 8th Avenue. Foreman's plan. Foreman's eyes were like slits.
Yes.
I forget what round it was, but he took a tremendous beating.
Yes, he did.
Moore hung a jab and left it out there. The 10th of a second would have been too long. Of course comes George with his jab, freezes him, hits him with the right hand. You could have counted to 190. But it was his plan. It was a painful plan. He stuck to it, and he became a champion again. And as I said after that fight, in fact, I remember writing in my lead, what happened here in Las Vegas last night was not a prize fight for George Foreman. It was a full blown 100% exorcism, because that followed him all his life until then. He said to me, I should have gotten up, been able to get up in Zaire. I should have died if I had to, if I'd known what the stake was. It's good to be champion, he said, and I know that.
And he was wearing the same trunks as that night as well.
Yep. Oh, he knew. Yeah.
Did you? No, you go ahead. You go ahead. I did.
No, I said he knew how to fight this guy, and he knew it was gonna work. He didn't. I don't think he felt that his eyes would be in that bad a shape, but they were.
Yeah, yeah, and also too. I mean, he by that point in his second comeback, or in his comeback, he had lost the step. George had, right. He wasn't the fighter that fought Holyfield in '91. He had lost a little bit, and so Moore was taking advantage of that for what, 9 rounds.
Well, Moore knew he could take it, and in his mind, he was going to win this fight the moment he stepped in the ring. He was going to cut him up.
Yep.
And Moore was a really good boxer.
Yes.
So, but it was amazing. I don't know whether Moore believed it happened when it happened. I mean, I don't know how you could.
Right. What's the first thought that went through your head when you saw Moore hit the canvas?
I thought about that little meeting when I was sitting with him and Teddy Atlas. And Teddy said, you only got a shot at, if you hang one jab, you cannot win this fight. And Moore didn't believe it. Yep. I didn't believe it either, but that came back to my mind the minute Foreman threw that right hand.
Wow.
Nobody was going to get up from that. Ali would not have gotten up from that right hand.
It was just perfect. It was had everything. Do you think that George Foreman? I've always said this, and I believe it, but do you think that George Foreman is the hardest puncher that ever lived?
No.
No?
Well, we're talking about heavyweights now, because the guys could punch pretty hard. Some other guy, Bob Forster's right hand was ferocious.
Yep.
But these are the hardest. These guys that I'm going to mention to you had the best jab. And not in this order.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say Ali first, because he did not have. Ali's jab cut you, and he wore you down. He debilitated you. The other guys could knock you out with a jab. I saw Foreman knock out Ken Norton with a jab in Venezuela. I was sitting next to Eddie Futch, who had been both Joe Frazier and Norton's trainer. And as soon as that jab landed, and the air seemed to go out of Norton, and Eddie leaned over and he said, "Fight's over."
Just like that.
Just like that's all he said. Fight's over.
Yeah.
The hardest jabbers were among the hardest hitters. Ali is in the group. He is by no. I won't pick a number one because the other guys had great jabs, but he is not number one. The other guys, Joe Louis, Sonny Liston, and George Foreman. And as for power, I say the same heavyweights. And the reason I mention them is because everybody thought Joe Louis knocked out people with the right course.
Mm-hmm.
He hit him in the solar plexus first with a left hook that went about 6 inches. Nobody saw that. He was out of it when it landed. They all saw the right hand because that's what a fighter does. He always throws the second punch. So I don't think. And Ali is there for the effectiveness of his jab, but not for the power in it.
Sure.
But the
Sure.
other guys, Sonny Liston may have been the hardest puncher I ever lived
Really. Did he punch harder than Foreman?
in some fights. He fought. I don't know if you ever heard of Cleveland Williams.
Yes.
Cleveland Williams had a body, and when he stopped fighting, he rented himself as a sculptor's model. It's a perfect body.
Yep.
He
Big
hit
cat.
He hit George Foreman so hard in the first round in Miami. He almost knocked him out. If there hadn't been ring ropes, the fight would have been over. They had to go look for George for Sonny. In the second round, second or third, Sonny stopped him.
Oh.
Sonny was Sonny. You know, he fought Chuck Webner, who was a
Hmm.
good friend of mine. I really, really liked the guy very much. He's a real person. And he said to me one day, Chuck,
Hmm.
I always liked you because you're the only person who never called me the Bayonne bleeder. And I said, I was saving that. I was saving that. I had one life's ambition. I wanted to be a promoter for one fight. I wanted to fight you against Henry Cooper. I wanted the plasma concession, and I would have cashed in on it before either one of you got to the ring.
That's good. Um, Couple more questions. I'll let you go, Jerry.
Yeah.
What what are your thoughts on boxing in 2024?
I'll go back to when I was maybe 10 years old, maybe a little younger. All of the champions were crowned by a group called the National Boxing Association. Nothing else existed. There were 8 champions. 5 of them were Jewish. Why? Very simple reason. They were followed by the Poles and the Italians, who were followed by the blacks, who were followed by the Latinos. I don't ever see any Harvard cum laude guy says, I think I'll try to box for a living for a week. You know, it's pretty hard to want it to admit you're going to have to go out and get hit in the face to put the food on the table. Joe Walcott was an ordinary fighter and he retired. He wasn't going anywhere. And it was one Christmas or 3 days before Christmas. He had a house he lived in. And they didn't have any coal for the furnace. He said, I'll go back for one fight to make the coal money, which he did. And then, of course, he wound up winning a title. But it's you got to really have a reason to fight. It's some of the fights I've seen. You know what was the greatest fight I ever saw in my life?
What?
I'm sorry I can't say Cain versus Abel because my camel died on the way to Madison Square Garden. And when I got there was one guy was on the floor dead, and the other guy had a big mark on his forehead. So I missed that fight. And I won't say Jack Dempsey fight. I saw a couple of them, but I knew him very well from his restaurant.
Yes.
Well, he used all those knockouts. I don't think he could fight. He could punch. He weighed 185 pounds. But I also think that a lot of them wouldn't have been knockouts. There was no neutral corner rule. He'd knock you on your ass. He'd stand over you. When you start to get up, bang, he'd hit you on the head to be down again.
Hmm.
It cost him his title because that was the fight with
Tunny.
Tunney.
Hmm.
That was the fight with Tunney. That, pardon me, he he didn't go to the neutral corner. It was the first neutral corner fight.
Wow. Yeah.
So
Almost 100 years ago, Jerry. That's almost 100 years ago.
is that right? Well, I could have made it maybe in a stroller, but I'm 94 now. But what I did want to say, the greatest fight, bar none, I've ever seen in my life at any weight. Not the greatest round, the greatest fight. Ali Frazier 3. That was the real fight. The first fight, America was deputizing. You'll be the black guy. You'll be the white guy. You'll be. I mean, it was the first fight was for the fans. They did what they wanted. Second fight was a terrible fight. The
Yes.
third fight, I knew it was going to be great. I pull up to the hotel in a cab in Manila, and there's a guy standing there, little guy, maybe 5'1", maybe 5 foot, in tails and a top hat, and he's yelling, "I spoke to God last night, and God told me Joe Frazier will win this fight." And I was with Lisker, and I said, "Hey, go up and ask him if he'll give me 5-1 on that." But that fight, everybody says I was crazy. I didn't know what I saw. My scorecard was very different than a lot of people's.
Okay.
My scorecard, if there had been a 15th round, which there wasn't, going into the 15th round, my scorecard, Ali was 1 point ahead. That's 1 point. And as a matter of fact, as a result of that 1 point, Foreman knocks him down and wins the round. He wins the fight. I'm not Foreman. I'm sorry, Frazier. He wins
Frazier.
the fight. If he wins the round, it's a draw on my scorecard. That's the only one I look at. And they cut the gloves. George Benton, under Eddie Futch's instruction, cut the gloves off him. The eyes were so bad.
Yep.
He said, "I'll never speak to you again if you cut those gloves off." And Futch said, "Son, your eyesight's worth a lot more than this title." Meanwhile, when they cut the gloves, Ali's up and he's looking and he sees it. At the end, and then they announce a decision. Frazier's raging, but he can't see anybody. Ali goes right to the ground. Gene Kilroy, a good friend of mine, says he didn't want to get hurt. That's why he couldn't stand up.
Yeah.
In the 12th round, 13th, one of those rounds, I don't remember which one, Frazier's got his arms by his side. His legs are trembling like wet spaghetti. Ali is a foot away. All he has to do is push him, fight over. He couldn't walk that foot. And at the end, he spotted me and Dave Anderson, me sitting side by side. He walked up, leaned into the press section to us. He said, "That's the closest you will ever see to death." The fight was just, and what's so amazing about that fight is each guy wanted to cheat. Every trainer and every manager looks for an edge. They want their referee because referees have refereeing styles,
Sure.
and some guys will let you fight inside. That's what Frazier wanted. Some guys will let you dance. So wait a minute, that's what they wanted. The other guy wanted. They wanted Zach Clayton, who had done the Foreman fight. So anyway, um, they each filed an objection with the Filipino Boxing Commission. I'm going to this rules meeting. In walks Colonel so and so. He's a colonel in the army. Sits at the desk, pulls out a gun that looks like it's an elephant gun, puts it on top of the table. And he says to both camps, "I understand there's been some objection. The argument is that a Filipino is not big enough or strong enough to referee this fight. I am here to tell you both." And he pats the gun and he says, "A Filipino will work this fight. Are there any objections?" They all looked at the elephant gun. "No, no, no, we don't have any objections," right? The guy, and then in walks, he says, "I want you to meet him." In walks the referee. He's the biggest Filipino I ever saw since Roman Gabriel. He worked a hell of a fight. Ali had a habit. He put his hand behind, he was Mr. America. He wasn't the cleanest fighter in the world. Put his hand behind your head, pull it down, and throw an uppercut. He did it early. You do it one more time, I'll throw you out of this building. Frazier hit him in the balls next round. You do that again, you're out of the building. It was a fight with no clinches. These guys were more afraid of the referee than they were of each other. And and if you made a graph of the fight, it would be like a Wall Street graph, up, down, up, down. You know, people don't know this. Ali used to speak in the ring all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to get mad at me. He said, "Don't write that about me. I don't do that." I said, "You're so focused on what you have to do, you don't even know you're doing it." Ali Frazier won. He's losing the fight, clearly. No matter, and he could convince anybody of anything, and he did after the fight, but he's losing the fight. They come to the 15th round. He comes out. It's like he turned back the clock. Pop, pop, pop. And Frazier goes back. And Ali is yelling at Frazier, "Fall, fall. Don't you know, you fool? God has ordained, Allah has ordained me to be heavyweight champion again. Who are you to argue with God?" And Frazier slips a punch, throws a hook, and says, "Well, God's going to get his ass whipped tonight." Down he goes. Now he said he never said it. Now in the third fight, uh, George Benton was brought into the camp by Fudge. Benton was a hell of a fighter. If Benton wasn't black, he'd have been a champion. And he said, Fudge told him, "You got one job. You got to teach him to throw a right hand. I don't care if it's weak. I don't care if it misses. He's got to make Ali stop and think that because I used to kid Joe. I used to say, if your shoes come untied, I'll tie them for you because you're a one-armed fighter. You can't tie your shoes with your left hand." So what happened was that he threw a right hand and hit him with it in the third. I think it was the third round. Ali stopped and said, "You ain't got no right hand. You have no. You're old. You can't throw a right hand. What do you?" He said, "Go ask George." Bang! He threw another one. That saved him. Turned the fight around, and it kept going up and down. Ali's ahead. He's ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Magnificent fight.